The Vietnam War timeline may start earlier than you think. We begin in around 1858, when the French colonize the area around Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. Time goes by, and in 1930, a guy named Ho Chi Minh starts his own Indo-Chinese party.
In Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh declares war on the French to gain his independence. Around the same time, the U.S. has established the domino theory.
But ultimately, the French lose, and Vietnam gains its independence, as well as Cambodia and Laos.
Geneva Accords are signed and there's peace. But then, a man named Diem goes against those to build his own society in the South. The Americans support Diem in his endeavor, and a communist group inside South Vietnam called the Viet Cong
Begins rioting
and committing terrorist attacks against the new South region.
American aid increases,
And although
the North Vietnamese have not claimed any alliance with the Viet Cong, there is an underlying alliance between those two parties. JFK authorizes around 16,000 to 17,000 advisors to Vietnam. Now, Diem has become sort of an unstable person at this point, and some of his decisions are unruly. So with the aid of the Americans, Diem is assassinated, and not long after, JFK is assassinated as well. The new president, Lyndon B. Johnson, authorizes 5,000 more advisors into Vietnam. Things begin to escalate when the Gulf of Tonkin incident happens. Essentially, the USS Maddox, an American boat, is fired upon by two Vietnamese patrol boats. And this is where things really start to get violent. Now this is where most storylines begin. Operation Rolling Thunder. Operation Rolling Thunder is essentially
a huge bombing campaign
on the North Vietnamese region of Vietnam. As Operation Rolling Thunder comes to a close, the U.S. deploys thousands of troops to Vietnam, as well as employing their search and destroy tactic. On November 14, 1965, the first major battle between the U.S. and the Vietnamese forces, or the People's Army of Vietnam, occurs in the Ia Drang Valley. Most of these soldiers by this time are draftees, and many of them do not have a desire to fight or to be there in the first place. In the year 1966, over 350,000 U.S. troops are active duty in Vietnam, and this is when the VC and the North Vietnamese really begin to use their guerrilla tactics to their advantage with various traps, mines, and a huge tunnel system, some of it dating back to the war with the French. In the year 1967, over 500,000 troops are active duty in Vietnam, and this is when the war begins to become a stalemate. The U.S. attack, the Vietnamese flee, and then they come back and attack the U.S. At this time, about 500 American soldiers are being killed per week, as well as the use of napalm gas and Agent Orange are starting to be deployed. In 1968, the Tet Offensive is launched. A huge offensive by the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese forces drives the U.S. back, and they lose their embassy. Now, after a few days, the U.S. has overwhelmed the forces using their full might, and they take the city, but not without heavy casualties on both sides, as well as a huge psychological defeat for the Americans. At this time, civil unrest has really erupted in the U.S. with wide protests across the nation. In 1969, Nixon orders the secret bombing of Cambodia, and then in 1970, he begins pulling his troops out of Vietnam amidst immense societal pressure. But at the same time, he bumps up his CIA operation to eliminate suspected Vietnamese men. From 1971 to 1972, the U.S. continues to pull their troops out of Vietnam, but is still in fierce combat with the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong. In 1973, finally, the Paris Peace Accords are signed, and the U.S. is to take all their troops out of Vietnam, as well as the U.S. Powers Act is signed, which restricts the president's authorization over U.S. troops going into foreign countries. And then in 1975, the North Vietnamese break the Paris Peace Act, invade South Vietnam, and take it over, uniting the country forcefully under a communist banner. The Vietnam War was an unnecessary conflict, resulting in immense loss of life and resources, driven by misguided political decisions. However, the bravery and sacrifice of the soldiers who fought in the Vietnam War will never be forgotten. Thank you for all the support. I hope you loved this video.
Make sure to hit that like button and the subscribe button below. See you guys in the next one.